Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on fascinating topics. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the incredible world inside us: nutrition, metabolism, and energy balance, as laid out in Chapter 24 of Human Anatomy and Physiology. Our mission: to go far beyond simply what you eat and truly understand the astonishing chemistry that turns food into life, energy, and everything that makes you, you.
What's truly fascinating here is how literal the saying "you are what you eat" actually becomes at a cellular level. It's not just about digestion and absorption. It's about nutrients fundamentally converting into the living fabric of your body. And crucially, most of these nutrients are then oxidized to form ATP. Think of ATP as the universal energy currency your body uses for every single action, from a thought to a muscle twitch. Without it, you couldn't even blink. So we're really going to explore the magic that happens after food is broken down and absorbed into your bloodstream.
That's a perfect frame. So let's start with the absolute basics. When we talk about food, what exactly are nutrients? Why are some deemed essential? And what are we really counting when we talk about a calorie?
Right. At its core, a nutrient is any substance from food your body needs for normal growth, maintenance, and repair. We broadly divide them into macronutrients, that's carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, which you consume in larger quantities, the bulk. And then micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, needed in tiny but equally vital amounts. Water, of course, is foundational. Now, essential nutrients are about 45 to 50 specific molecules your body simply can't make fast enough on its own, so they must come from your diet. You have to eat them. As for a calorie, what you're tracking on a food label is technically a kilocalorie, which is a precise measure of heat energy. It's the energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So it's literally a unit of fuel for your body's engine. That's why guidelines like the USDA's MyPlate, which you might see illustrated somewhere like Figure 24.1, emphasize a balanced diet with plenty of diverse whole foods.
Speaking of fuel, let's begin with carbohydrates. We hear a lot about them, good and bad. What are their sources, their different forms, and how does our body put them to work?
Well, most carbohydrates we eat come from plants. Think fruits, vegetables, grains, even honey and milk. They come in simple forms like sugars, monosaccharides, and disaccharides, and complex forms like starch, which is a polysaccharide. An important distinction is fiber. You've got insoluble fiber like cellulose, which acts as roughage, basically aiding digestion, keeps things moving. And then soluble fiber, like pectin, which actually helps reduce blood cholesterol. Now, once digested, glucose is the ultimate carb. It's the primary fuel for ATP production, especially crucial for your brain and red blood cells. They really rely on it. Any excess glucose that isn't immediately burned for energy gets smartly stored as glycogen in your liver and muscles. Or if there's a lot, it gets converted into fat. Small amounts are also used for building other vital components like nucleic acids and parts of cell membranes. The general recommendation for adults is that 45–65% of your daily calories should come from carbohydrates, leaning heavily towards those complex, nutrient-rich ones. You want to avoid the empty calories from highly processed sugary foods.
Okay, so carbs are a quick burn fuel and stored energy. Got it. Now, lipids, fats? Often controversial, but absolutely vital, correct?
Absolutely vital. Yeah, they get a bad rap sometimes, but we need them. The most common dietary fats are triglycerides. You find them in everything from animal products to nuts, seeds, and vegetable oils. And then there's cholesterol. Many people focus on dietary cholesterol from eggs or meat, but the truly astonishing fact is that your own liver produces about 85% of the cholesterol circulating in your blood.
Wow, 85% from our own liver.
Yep. Often, regardless of what you eat, though diet can influence it. We also need essential fatty acids like linoleic and linolenic acids. Those are omega-6 and omega-3, which your body can't make. So you must get them from your diet. Things like fish oil, flaxseed, walnuts.
Okay, that 85% liver production is a huge perspective shift. So what exactly do all these different types of lipids do for us then? Why are they vital?
Well, adipose tissue, your fat stores, do far more than just store energy. They provide protective cushioning for your organs, vital insulation against cold, and are our most concentrated energy reserve. Phospholipids are fundamental building blocks for all your cell membranes and the myelin sheaths covering nerves. Cholesterol, importantly, is not used for energy, but it stabilizes those cell membranes. And it's a precursor for crucial things like bile salts for digestion, steroid hormones like estrogen and testosterone, and vitamin D triglycerides are a major energy source, particularly for your resting muscles and liver. And dietary fats are essential for absorbing those fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. You can't absorb them without fat. Current guidelines suggest limiting total fats to 30% or less of your calories, saturated fats to under 10%, aiming for total blood cholesterol below 200 mg/dL.
Next up, proteins, the body's ultimate builders. What distinguishes complete proteins, and what's this idea of nitrogen balance?
Proteins are indeed the ultimate builders, yeah. Animal products, eggs, milk, fish, meat, are complete proteins because they contain all the essential amino acids. Those are the ones your body can't make itself, remember? Most plant proteins, like legumes, nuts, and cereals, are incomplete, meaning they're low in one or more essential amino acids. Soybeans are a notable exception. They're pretty complete. This is why strict vegetarians need to combine different plant proteins, like grains and beans perhaps, to get the full spectrum. It's about getting all those building blocks together. Proteins build everything from keratin in your hair and skin to the collagen in your connective tissues and, of course, your muscle fibers. They also function as enzymes, catalyzing reactions and hormones, sending signals, running virtually every process in your body.
So they're truly multitaskers,
Hmm.
very versatile. And this nitrogen balance concept, what's that about?
Right. For your body to build protein efficiently, there's something called the all or none rule. Basically, all the necessary amino acids must be present at the same time and in the right amounts. If you lack even one essential amino acid, protein synthesis can't proceed optimally. The available amino acids might just get burned for energy instead, which isn't ideal if you're trying to build tissue. Nitrogen balance refers to a homeostatic state where the rate of protein synthesis perfectly matches the rate of protein breakdown and loss. You're in positive nitrogen balance during periods of growth like childhood, pregnancy, or when you're repairing tissue after an injury. You're building more than you're breaking down. Negative nitrogen balance, on the other hand, occurs during stress, physical or emotional, poor diet, or starvation. Here, protein breakdown exceeds synthesis, potentially leading to muscle wasting. We generally recommend around 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for the average adult.
And finally, for our nutrients, the crucial micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, tiny amounts, but what do they do?
Right? Micro means small quantity, but not small importance. Vitamins are organic compounds, almost like tiny helper molecules. They're needed in minute amounts for growth and health. They don't provide energy directly, but they mostly act as coenzymes, essentially helping your body utilize all the other nutrients, like carbs and fats. Most aren't made by your body. You have to get them from your diet. Though there are exceptions. Vitamin D from sunlight on skin, some B and K vitamins by gut bacteria. We categorize them into water-soluble like B complex and C. These dissolve in water, aren't really stored long-term, and any excess is usually flushed out in your urine. Vitamin B12 is a bit special. It needs a protein called intrinsic factor made in your stomach to be absorbed properly. Then there are fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. These bind to fats in your diet and are absorbed with them. These are stored in your body, mainly in the liver and fat tissue. So excessive intake, especially vitamin A, can actually lead to toxicity. You have to be careful with supplements. Many vitamins like C, E, and A, as beta-carotene, along with mineral selenium, also act as powerful antioxidants. They neutralize harmful molecules called free radicals that can damage your cells. Minerals, on the other hand, are inorganic substances. They make up about 4% of your body weight. Calcium and phosphorus are the big ones, forming the bulk of your bones and teeth, 3/4 of your mineral mass. Like vitamins, they don't provide fuel, but they're absolutely critical. Many exist as ions in your body fluids. Think iron and hemoglobin carrying oxygen, or sodium and chloride as major electrolytes essential for fluid balance and nerve impulses. Iodine is needed for thyroid hormone. Maintaining a fine balance of uptake and excretion is crucial. Too much can be toxic. For example, too much sodium, often hidden in processed foods, can lead to fluid retention and high blood pressure. Good sources are generally vegetables, legumes, milk, and some meats.
Okay, so we've stocked the pantry, so to speak, with all these amazing nutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals. But now comes the really magical part. How does our body actually turn a humble carbohydrate or fat into the sheer energy that powers every single cell? This is where it gets really interesting. Let's dive into the fascinating world of metabolism itself.
Precisely. Metabolism is the sum total of all the biochemical reactions continuously happening in your body. Substances are constantly being built up and torn down. It's fundamentally how your cells extract energy from food to fuel their activities. Everything they do, we break it down into two main types. Anabolism is the building up part synthesizing complex molecules from simpler ones, like forming proteins from amino acids. Think of it as construction. Catabolism is the breaking down part like cellular respiration, where food fuels are broken down to release ATP. Think of it as demolition for energy release. A core concept here is phosphorylation, where ATP transfers one of its high-energy phosphate groups to another molecule. This essentially primes that molecule, activating it for some kind of cellular work.
Nutrient processing in the body happens in three main stages. You can probably see this in a figure like 24.3. Stage 1 is digestion and absorption in your GI tract, getting those nutrients into your bloodstream and transported to your cells. Stage 2 happens in the cytoplasm of your cells. Here, nutrients are either built into larger molecules like proteins or glycogen, or they're broken down into simpler compounds like pyruvic acid. Glycolysis is a major pathway here. Then stage 3, which is almost entirely catabolic and requires oxygen, happens inside the mitochondria, the cell's power plants. This is where food breakdown is completed, producing carbon dioxide, water, and harvesting large amounts of ATP. This involves the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation.
And many of these reactions are called redox reactions. What does that mean, and why are they so crucial for energy transfer?
Redox. It's short for oxidation reduction. Oxidation basically means a substance loses electrons, often by gaining oxygen or losing hydrogen atoms. Reduction means it gains electrons. The key is they're always coupled. One substance is oxidized while another is simultaneously reduced. They happen together. This is fundamentally how energy is moved around chemically. Oxidized substances lose energy, while reduced substances gain energy because energy travels with those electrons. This is precisely how your body transfers the energy stored in the chemical bonds of food, step by step, into the high-energy bonds of ATP. Two crucial helper molecules, coenzymes called NAD+ and FAD, act like electron shuttles or taxis. They pick up hydrogen atoms and their high-energy electrons during fuel breakdown and deliver them to the machinery that makes ATP.
So how do cells actually capture this energy to make ATP? What are the main ways?
Your cells primarily use two methods. First, there's substrate-level phosphorylation. This is a very direct, straightforward transfer. A high-energy phosphate group is transferred directly from a metabolic intermediate, a substrate, to ADP, forming ATP. This happens relatively quickly in the cell's cytoplasm during glycolysis, and also in the mitochondrial matrix during the citric acid cycle. It's a bit like a direct cash payment. Quick, but yields less overall. The second and far more significant method is oxidative phosphorylation. This is much more complex and happens on the inner membranes of the mitochondria. Think of it like a tiny hydroelectric dam. Energy released bit by bit from the oxidation of food fuels, carried by NAD+ and FAD, is used to pump protons, hydrogen ions, across the inner mitochondrial membrane into the space between the membranes. This pumping creates a steep concentration gradient, like water building up behind a dam, potential energy. Then these protons flow back down their gradient through a specialized protein channel called ATP synthase. This ATP synthase harnesses that flow of protons, using the energy like a tiny rotary motor to spin and synthesize huge amounts of ATP from ADP and phosphate. It's really quite amazing. This is where most of your body's energy currency is minted. And it explains why metabolic poisons like cyanide are so deadly. They block this electron transport, stopping ATP production cold.
That's a powerful analogy, the hydroelectric dam. So let's trace the journey of glucose, the central player in ATP production, through this system. How does that work?
Okay, glucose. It enters your cells, largely facilitated by the hormone insulin, and then it's immediately phosphorylated. A phosphate group is added. This effectively traps it inside the cell. The overall goal, the equation you often see, is to break down glucose combined with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and a lot of ATP plus heat. This journey happens in distinct stages. First, glycolysis. This occurs right in the cell cytoplasm. This pathway breaks one molecule of glucose down into two smaller molecules called pyruvic acid. It actually releases a little bit of energy quickly, yielding a net gain of 2 ATP via substrate-level phosphorylation. Importantly, glycolysis itself is anaerobic, doesn't use oxygen directly, though what happens next depends heavily on oxygen.
Okay, so glycolysis gives us pyruvic acid. What happens to it then?
Well, that depends entirely on whether oxygen is available. If oxygen is present, the pyruvic acid moves into the mitochondria to enter the aerobic pathways. If oxygen is not available, like during really strenuous exercise when your muscles can't get oxygen fast enough, pyruvic acid is reduced to lactic acid. This lactic acid can diffuse out into the blood and travel to the liver, where it can eventually be converted back to glucose when oxygen is available again. But too much lactic acid can cause problems with pH balance. Assuming oxygen is available, we move into the mitochondria. First, there's a transitional step where pyruvic acid is converted into a molecule called acetyl-CoA. This releases the first molecule of CO2. Then this acetyl-CoA enters the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, which takes place in the mitochondrial matrix. Here, the acetyl-CoA is systematically broken down carbon by carbon, releasing more CO2. The main products, though, are those reduced coenzymes NADH and FADH2 loaded with high-energy electrons. And a tiny bit more ATP is made via substrate-level phosphorylation. This cycle is incredibly central. It's a common pathway for oxidizing not just carbs, but also intermediates from fat and protein breakdown.
And then the grand finale, the electron transport chain.
Exactly. The electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. This is the true powerhouse stage, happening on the folds of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And this is the only part of cellular respiration that directly uses the oxygen you breathe. Those electron carriers, NADH and FADH2, generated earlier, now dump their high-energy electrons onto a series of protein complexes embedded in the membrane. It's like a bucket brigade, as electrons are passed down the chain from one carrier to the next, releasing energy at each step. This released energy is used to pump those protons, H+, across the membrane, building up that steep gradient we talked about. Finally, the electrons, now at a lower energy state, are passed to oxygen, which combines with protons to form water, the final electron acceptor. Without oxygen, the whole chain backs up. Then ATP synthase, that amazing rotary motor, lets the protons flow back across the membrane down their gradient, using that energy to churn out ATP. Lots of it. From just one glucose molecule, under ideal conditions, your body can generate a maximum of around 30 to 32 ATP molecules. Most of that, about 28 ATP, comes from this oxidative phosphorylation stage. It's remarkably efficient.
Given how crucial glucose is, how does the body manage when it has too much or not enough? It must have ways to store and make it right.
Absolutely. It's all about maintaining balance, especially blood glucose levels. When ATP levels are high and you have excess glucose that isn't needed immediately for energy, your body stores it through glycogenesis. This process converts glucose molecules into a large branched polymer called glycogen, primarily in your liver and skeletal muscle cells. It's like packing away energy for later. When blood glucose levels start to drop, say, between meals, glycogenolysis kicks in. This reverses the process, breaking down stored glycogen back into glucose. Your liver is particularly good at this and can release this free glucose into the bloodstream to keep levels stable, especially for the brain. Muscle cells tend to hold onto their glycogen stores for their own use. And when glucose is truly scarce, perhaps during prolonged fasting and glycogen stores are depleted, your liver, and to some extent kidneys, can perform gluconeogenesis, literally forming new glucose. It makes glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like glycerol from fats or certain amino acids from proteins. This is a critical backup plan to protect your nervous system from dangerously low blood sugar.
That's incredible adaptability. So how are fats, the body's most concentrated energy source, metabolized, stored, and what happens when that process goes awry?
Right. Fats, primarily triglycerides, are indeed the most concentrated energy source. Their breakdown for energy involves two main parts. The glycerol backbone is converted into an intermediate that can enter the glycolysis pathway. The fatty acids undergo a process called beta oxidation within the mitochondria. This chops the long fatty acid chains into two carbon fragments. These fragments become acetyl-CoA, which can then enter the citric acid cycle to generate ATP, NADH, and FADH2, just like the acetyl-CoA from glucose. It yields a lot of energy per gram compared to carbs. Now, when your cells have high ATP and glucose levels, meaning energy needs are met, they store excess energy efficiently as fat through lipogenesis. This is why, perhaps counterintuitively, even if you eat a low-fat diet but consume excess carbohydrates or proteins, that excess can still be converted via acetyl-CoA into fatty acids and glycerol and then stored as triglycerides in adipose tissue.
So the body is very good at storing fat. What about breaking it down? And what's this ketosis thing?
Yes. Lipolysis is the breakdown of those stored fats back into fatty acids and glycerol, releasing them into the blood. Many tissues, like liver, heart, and resting skeletal muscle, prefer using fatty acids for fuel. Now, ketosis. There's an old saying, fats burn in the flame of carbohydrates. What this means is that for fat oxidation to proceed efficiently all the way through the citric acid cycle, you need sufficient intermediates derived from carbohydrate metabolism. If carbohydrate intake is very low or unavailable, like in starvation, extreme low-carb diets, or uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, your body relies heavily on fat breakdown. Fat oxidation becomes incomplete. Acetyl-CoA starts to accumulate because the citric acid cycle can't keep up. Your liver then converts this excess acetyl-CoA into molecules called ketone bodies. These are released into the blood and can be used as an alternative fuel source by some tissues, including the brain during prolonged fasting. However, ketone bodies are acidic. If they build up too much, it leads to ketosis, which can progress to ketoacidosis, where blood pH drops dangerously low. This can cause symptoms like fruity-smelling breath from acetone, a type of ketone body, and rapid breathing as the body tries to compensate. And of course, beyond energy, fats like phospholipids and cholesterol are vital structural components of cell membranes, and cholesterol is the precursor for steroid hormones and bile salts.
Okay, lastly for breakdown, how are amino acids handled? They build proteins, obviously, but what if they're used for energy? And what about that nitrogen?
Right, amino acids are primarily the body's building blocks, constantly recycled to build all your protein structures and functional molecules like enzymes. But unlike fats and carbohydrates, the body doesn't really have a dedicated storage depot for excess protein or amino acids. If you consume more protein than you need for building and repair, those excess amino acids are either oxidized for energy or converted into fat or glycogen for storage. But before they can be used for energy or converted, their amine group, the part containing nitrogen, must be removed. This process is called deamination. It usually happens in a couple of steps. First, transamination, where the amine group is transferred from the amino acid to another molecule, often forming glutamic acid. Then, in the liver, oxidative deamination removes the amine group from glutamic acid as ammonia, NH3. Now, ammonia is highly toxic to the body, so the liver immediately combines this ammonia with carbon dioxide through a series called the urea cycle to form urea. Urea is much less toxic and is then released into the blood, filtered by the kidneys, and excreted in urine. It's a vital detoxification process. The remaining part of the amino acid, the keto acid, is then modified so it can enter the metabolic pathways, usually the citric acid cycle, to be burned for energy, or it can be converted back into glucose via gluconeogenesis if needed. And just to reiterate, protein synthesis needs all essential amino acids simultaneously. If any are missing, synthesis stops, and other amino acids might get deaminated for energy, possibly leading to that negative nitrogen balance we talked about.
Wow. Okay, bringing all these biochemical reactions together, this incredibly complex machinery needs tight control. How does the body manage this whole catabolic and anabolic balance? How does it regulate hunger and even our body temperature? It seems like a huge orchestration job.
It really is a masterful act of coordination. Your body exists in this constant dynamic catabolic-anabolic balance, where organic molecules are continuously broken down for energy and rebuilt into structures or stored. It draws on interconnected nutrient pools of available amino acids, carbohydrates, and fats circulating in the blood. These pools are remarkably interconvertible to a large extent. Your liver, adipose tissue, and skeletal muscles are the key players here, acting as the main effector organs managing these conversions and storage. The amino acid pool is a bit distinct from the carbohydrate fat pool, though. Fats and carbs can be directly oxidized for energy and stored quite efficiently as glycogen or fat. But excess amino acids aren't stored as protein. They're either oxidized for energy or converted to fat or glycogen after that nitrogen group is dealt with.
Let's talk about the body's two main nutritional states then. What happens right after a meal versus when you're fasting?
Right, we talk about the absorptive state and the post-absorptive state. The absorptive state, or fed state, is during and shortly after eating, usually lasting about 4 hours per meal. During this time, nutrients are flooding into your bloodstream from your digestive tract as they get absorbed. Anabolism, the building up processes, exceeds catabolism, the breaking down processes. Nutrients are used for energy, but also significantly stored for later. Glucose is the body's major energy fuel during this time. And any excess metabolites, whether from carbs, fats, or even proteins if consumed in excess, are typically converted into fat for storage in adipose tissue. The key hormonal director of the absorptive state is insulin. As blood glucose and amino acid levels rise after a meal, your pancreatic beta cells release insulin. Insulin acts on most body cells, particularly muscle and fat cells, telling them to take up glucose and amino acids from the blood. It promotes the use of glucose for ATP production, stimulates its conversion to glycogen in the liver and muscles, promotes triglyceride synthesis in adipose tissue, and boosts protein synthesis. Essentially, insulin is a hypoglycemic hormone because it sweeps glucose out of the blood and into cells, lowering blood glucose levels. This also helps understand disorders like diabetes mellitus, where there's either inadequate insulin production or the body's cells don't respond properly to it, leading to high blood glucose, hyperglycemia, and problems with nutrient utilization and storage.
Okay, so insulin dominates the fed state, promoting storage. What about when the GI tract is empty during the fasting state?
That's the post-absorptive state, or fasting state. This is when the GI tract is empty, and energy must be supplied by breaking down the body's own reserves. Now, net synthesis of fat, glycogen, and protein stops, and catabolism begins to dominate. The primary goal during this state is absolutely crucial. Maintain blood glucose levels within a stable range around 70 to 110 mg/dL. Why?
because the brain relies almost exclusively on glucose for its energy needs under normal conditions. To achieve this, the body taps into several sources of glucose. First, glycogenolysis in the liver. Stored liver glycogen is broken down, releasing glucose into the blood. This is the first line of defense, lasting maybe 4 hours or so. Second, glycogenolysis in skeletal muscle. Muscle glycogen is broken down, but muscle cells lack the enzyme to release free glucose. Instead, the glucose is partly oxidized, and the products, like lactate, can go to the liver to be converted back into glucose, gluconeogenesis. Third, lipolysis in adipose tissues and the liver. Triglycerides are broken down into glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol can travel to the liver and be converted into glucose via gluconeogenesis. Fatty acids, however, cannot be directly converted to glucose in humans. Fourth, and this becomes important during prolonged fasting beyond glycogen stores, is catabolism of cellular protein. Muscle protein is broken down. Amino acids travel to the liver and kidneys, are deaminated, and their carbon skeletons are used for gluconeogenesis. This really underscores how vital fat stores are for survival. During long fasts, they spare protein breakdown.
And the body adapts further during long fasts, right? This glucose sparing.
Exactly. During prolonged fasting, the body shifts its fuel usage. Most organs start burning more fats for energy, thus sparing the limited glucose supply primarily for the brain. Furthermore, as ketone bodies build up from fat breakdown, the brain actually adapts to start using them as a significant energy source, further reducing its dependence on glucose. Hormonal control here is more complex. Insulin secretion drops. The main player now is glucagon, released by pancreatic alpha cells. Glucagon is basically insulin's antagonist. It's a hyperglycemic hormone that raises blood glucose. Glucagon primarily targets the liver, stimulating glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. It also promotes lipolysis in adipose tissue, mobilizing fats. Interestingly, rising amino acid levels after a high-protein meal actually stimulate both insulin and glucagon release. This might seem odd, but it helps prevent hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, while still allowing amino acids to be used for synthesis. The sympathetic nervous system also plays a role, especially under stress or during exercise. Epinephrine release mobilizes fat and promotes glycogenolysis, boosting fuel availability quickly.
Let's quickly spotlight the liver here. You've mentioned it several times. It sounds like a real metabolic powerhouse.
Oh, absolutely. The liver is arguably the body's most metabolically versatile organ. It performs over 500 intricate functions, many related to what we've discussed. It's central to carbohydrate metabolism. It can convert different sugars like fructose and galactose to glucose, store glucose as glycogen, perform gluconeogenesis, and even convert excess glucose to fat. For fat metabolism, it's the primary site of beta oxidation, breaking down fatty acids. It forms ketone bodies, stores some fats, synthesizes lipoproteins like VLDL to transport fats, and it synthesizes and processes cholesterol. In protein metabolism, it deaminates amino acids for energy use, synthesizes urea to get rid of toxic ammonia, produces most of the essential plasma proteins like albumin, and performs transamination reactions to interconvert amino acids. Plus, it stores essential vitamins like A, D, B12, and minerals like iron, and it's crucial for detoxifying drugs, alcohol, and other metabolic wastes. It's essentially your body's central metabolic clearinghouse and processing unit.
Cholesterol gets so much attention, often negatively. You mentioned lipoproteins. What exactly are LDLs and HDLs, and why do they matter so much for our health?
Right, cholesterol. It's not an energy source, remember, but it's vital structurally for cell membranes and as a precursor for bile salts, steroid hormones, vitamin D. And as we said, most of it, maybe 85%, is actually synthesized by your liver, not directly from diet. Since cholesterol and triglycerides are lipids, fats, they aren't water-soluble, so they need special transport vehicles to travel in the bloodstream. These are the lipoproteins, basically little packages of lipids wrapped in protein. We classify them by density. VLDLs, or very low-density lipoproteins, are made by the liver primarily to transport triglycerides out to your tissues, especially adipose tissue. As VLDLs unload their triglycerides, they become denser and morph into LDLs, low-density lipoproteins. LDLs are now cholesterol-rich, and their main job is to transport cholesterol to peripheral tissues for use in membranes, hormones, etc. These are often called the L for lousy or bad cholesterol, because if there are excessive levels of LDLs or if the body's cells aren't taking them up properly, the cholesterol can end up getting deposited in artery walls, contributing to atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. Conversely, HDLs, high-density lipoproteins, are known as H for healthy or good cholesterol. HDLs are produced mainly by the liver and intestines. Their main job is essentially reverse cholesterol transport. They scoop up excess cholesterol from peripheral tissues and artery walls and transport it back to the liver for breakdown and excretion in bile. So you want low LDL and high HDL. Recommended levels are typically total cholesterol below 200 mg/dl, with protective HDL levels ideally above 60 mg/dl, and detrimental LDL levels ideally below 100 mg/dl. Various factors influence these levels. Saturated fats tend to stimulate liver cholesterol synthesis and inhibit its excretion. Unsaturated fats tend to enhance excretion. Trans fats, found in many processed foods, are particularly bad. They raise LDL and lower HDL. Omega-3 fatty acids, like in fish oil, are generally beneficial. Lifestyle factors matter too. Smoking and stress can lower HDL, while regular aerobic exercise and estrogen tend to lower LDL and raise HDL. High LDL levels are strongly linked to atherosclerosis, heart attacks, and strokes, which is why managing cholesterol, often with diet, exercise, or medications like statins, is a major focus in cardiovascular health.
Okay, stepping back from the specific nutrients, how does the body regulate overall energy balance? Energy in versus energy out? And why, despite all this intricate control, do so many people struggle with maintaining a healthy weight?
Energy balance is, at its core, a simple equation. Energy intake, calories from food, must equal energy output. Energy immediately lost as heat plus energy used for work plus energy stored. Most of the energy derived from food oxidation, maybe 60% or more, is actually converted directly to heat. This isn't wasted energy, it's vital for maintaining our warm body temperature. The rest is captured as ATP for cellular work or stored. The regulation of food intake, which determines energy input, is incredibly complex. It's not just about willpower. It involves intricate neural circuits primarily located in the hypothalamus in the brain. There are specific centers and neuron groups that promote hunger, or exogenic, and others that promote satiety, anorexigenic, responding to a wide array of signals. As for why we struggle with weight, well, obesity, generally defined as a body mass index, BMI, over 30, is a really multifaceted problem. There's rarely a single cause. Contributing factors can include things like childhood overeating, potentially leading to a higher number of fat cells for life. Inherent metabolic differences, where some individuals are just more fuel efficient and tend to store fat more readily, or their metabolic rate drops more significantly when dieting. Genetic predispositions certainly play a role in some cases. And emerging research points to the influence of our gut bacteria composition on inflammation and fat deposition.
So what kind of signals control our eating behavior day to day and long term?
We have short-term regulation and long-term regulation. Short-term signals manage hunger and satiety from meal to meal. These include neural signals from the digestive tract, like stretch receptors in the stomach wall, telling your brain you're full. Blood nutrient levels also play a role. Rising blood glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids after a meal tend to suppress hunger signals. Several hormones are involved too. Hormones from the GI tract, like insulin and cholecystokinin, CCK, act as satiety signals. Conversely, a hormone called ghrelin, produced mainly by the stomach when it's empty, is a powerful hunger stimulant. It makes you feel hungry. Long-term regulation is more about maintaining overall body weight and energy stores over weeks and months. The key player here is the hormone leptin. Leptin is secreted by adipose fat cells in proportion to the amount of fat stored. It travels to the brain and generally acts to suppress appetite and increase energy expenditure, basically signaling that energy stores are sufficient. However, many obese individuals appear to be leptin resistant. They have high leptin levels, but their brains don't respond properly to its appetite-suppressing signals. Insulin also plays a role in long-term regulation. Other factors influence intake too, like body temperature, psychological factors, stress eating, boredom eating, sleep deprivation, which tends to increase hunger hormones, and even certain infections. Ultimately, while there are some newer drugs targeting these pathways, and bariatric surgery is an option for severe obesity, the cornerstone for most people remains consistent changes in dietary habits and increasing physical activity.
Finally, let's explore body temperature regulation. You mentioned heat is a major output. Why is maintaining our temperature so critical, and how does the body manage that constant balancing act?
Maintaining body temperature, typically averaging around 37 degrees C or 98.6 degrees AFROM, within a pretty narrow range, is absolutely critical. Why? Because it's the optimal temperature for most of our body's enzymatic reactions to function efficiently. If your core temperature goes too high hyperthermia, say above 41 degrees C, 106 degrees if day, neurons can become depressed and vital proteins start to denature or unfold, potentially leading to convulsions, organ damage, or even death. Conversely, if it drops too low, hypothermia metabolic rate slows dramatically, which can lead to drowsiness, confusion, and eventually cardiac arrest. So your body achieves this stable temperature by constantly balancing heat production with heat loss. At rest, most heat is generated as a byproduct of the metabolism in your core organs: liver, heart, brain, kidneys, endocrine glands. But skeletal muscle activity, whether voluntary exercise or involuntary shivering, can dramatically increase heat production. sometimes by tenfold or more.
We distinguish between core temperature, the temperature of your internal organs within the skull, thoracic, and abdominal cavities, which is precisely regulated, and shell temperature, the temperature of your skin, which fluctuates much more widely and acts as the primary heat exchange surface with the environment. Blood flow is the major agent transferring heat between the core and the shell.
So how does heat actually move between our body and the environment?
Heat exchange happens through four main physical mechanisms. There's radiation, which is the loss of heat in the form of infrared waves. Like heat radiating off a hot sidewalk, your body radiates heat to cooler objects around it. Accounts for about half our heat loss in a cool room. Then conduction, which is heat transfer by direct contact. Sitting on a cold chair transfers heat from you to the chair. Convection is heat transfer by the movement of the surrounding air or fluid. Warm air next to your skin rises and is replaced by cooler air, carrying heat away. This is significantly enhanced by wind or fans. That's forced convection. And finally, evaporation, which is the conversion of water from liquid to gas. This requires absorbing heat energy from the body. We have a constant insensible water loss from our lungs and through the skin, but sensible sweating is an active controlled process by sweat glands that provides very efficient cooling, especially in dry conditions. High humidity hampers evaporation, making you feel hotter. Your hypothalamus in the brain acts as your body's main thermostat. It has specific heat loss and heat-promoting centers. It constantly receives input from thermoreceptors, temperature sensors, located both peripherally in the skin and centrally, monitoring the temperature of the blood flowing through the hypothalamus itself.
So what happens if you get too cold or too hot? How does the hypothalamus respond?
Okay, if your external temperature is low or your core blood temperature drops, the hypothalamus triggers heat-promoting mechanisms. First, constriction of cutaneous blood vessels. Sympathetic nerves cause blood vessels in the skin to narrow, restricting warm blood flow to the skin surface and diverting it deeper into the core, minimizing heat loss to the environment. This is why your skin might look pale and feel cold. Extreme vasoconstriction can lead to frostbite if tissue freezes. Second, shivering. The brain triggers involuntary contractions of skeletal muscles, which generate significant heat as a byproduct. Third, an increase in metabolic rate, sometimes called chemical or non-shivering thermogenesis. Hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine can boost metabolic activity, especially in infants using brown adipose tissue, though adults have some too. Fourth, in infants particularly, gradual exposure to cold can enhance the release of thyroxine from the thyroid gland, which also increases metabolic rate over the longer term. Of course, behavioral modifications are key. Putting on more clothes, curling up, seeking shelter, increasing physical activity, drinking warm fluids.
And if you get too hot?
If your core temperature starts to rise, the hypothalamus initiates heat loss mechanisms. First, dilation of cutaneous blood vessels. The sympathetic signals causing vasoconstriction are inhibited, allowing warm blood to flood into the capillary beds of the skin. Your skin becomes flushed and warm, enhancing heat loss through radiation, conduction, and convection. Second, enhanced sweating. The sympathetic nervous system activates sweat glands to pour out sweat onto the skin surface. As this sweat evaporates, it effectively pulls large amounts of heat away from the body. And again, behavior plays a huge role. Reducing activity, seeking shade or cooler environments, wearing light clothing, using fans.
Are there clinical conditions related to these failures?
Yes, absolutely. Severe uncontrolled hyperthermia leads to heat stroke. This happens when the body's temperature rises so high, often due to prolonged heat exposure and dehydration, that the normal thermoregulatory mechanisms actually fail. It can create a vicious positive feedback loop where the high temperature itself increases metabolic rate, generating even more heat. This is a medical emergency, potentially fatal due to organ damage. It's different from heat exhaustion, which involves dehydration and loss of electrolytes, but the core temperature regulation is usually still working. On the other end, hypothermia is dangerously low body temperature, typically resulting from prolonged exposure to cold. Vital signs slow, the person becomes confused and drowsy, and eventually shivering stops and cardiac arrest can occur. Lastly, fever is a fascinating case. It's essentially a controlled hyperthermia. During an infection, immune cells release chemicals called pyrogens, like certain cytokines. These pyrogens act on the hypothalamus, effectively resetting the body's thermostat to a higher set point. The body then feels cold relative to this new, higher set point and initiates heat-promoting mechanisms, vasoconstriction, shivering, the chills, until the core temperature reaches this new elevated level. Once the infection is overcome, the pyrogens disappear, the thermostat resets to normal, and the body activates heat loss mechanisms, sweating, vasodilation, feeling flushed, to bring the temperature back down. Fever is actually thought to be adaptive, helping the body fight infection by speeding up metabolism and potentially inhibiting pathogen growth.
This whole deep dive, from basic nutrients to complex energy regulation and temperature control, truly highlights how remarkably adaptable and resilient our human bodies are. It's amazing right from the start.
It really is. And good nutrition is absolutely paramount right from conception. It's crucial for fetal tissue growth, especially brain development in the first 3 years of life, and continues to be essential throughout life for tissue maintenance, repair, and efficient metabolism. We also see the critical importance of these pathways when things go wrong, like with inborn errors of metabolism. A classic example is phenylketonuria, or PKU, where infants lack the enzyme to properly metabolize the amino acid phenylalanine. If undetected and untreated with a special diet, it leads to severe brain damage. This highlights why newborn screening is so vital. Galactosemia and glycogen storage diseases are other examples where specific enzyme defects disrupt metabolic pathways. As we age, our metabolic rate naturally tends to decline, often due to loss of muscle mass and less efficient endocrine function. This can make it harder to get adequate nutrition without gaining weight. The liver's detoxifying capabilities may also become less efficient, impacting how older adults handle medications. Even glucose itself contributes subtly to aging through slow, non-enzymatic reactions, where it binds to proteins throughout the body, sometimes called Browning reactions. This can cause cross-linking, potentially contributing to things like lens clouding, cataracts, and tissue stiffening over time. And finally, a condition increasingly prevalent is metabolic syndrome. This isn't a single disease, but a cluster of 5 risk factors: increased waist circumference, abdominal obesity, high blood pressure, high blood glucose, high triglycerides, and low HDL cholesterol. Having 3 or more significantly increases the risk of developing heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. It seems linked to abnormal function of adipose tissue, especially excess visceral fat around the organs. Reducing abdominal fat through diet and exercise is really key to managing this.
In wrapping up this deep dive, then, it's just incredibly clear that this intricate ballet of nutrition, metabolism, and energy balance is happening within us every single second. It's quite profound.
It really reiterates how our bodies are constantly dynamically balancing catabolism and anabolism, interconverting fuels from those nutrient pools we discussed, and precisely regulating core temperature and energy intake against all sorts of internal and external challenges. It's a profound testament to the complex, adaptive systems that keep us alive and functioning.
It definitely makes you appreciate the profound connection between what we consume, the fuel we take in, and how our body incredibly transforms that into life, energy, structure, and overall health. Every meal, every breath, it's all part of this magnificent, ongoing biochemical symphony. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Given the body's remarkable ability to adapt its metabolism based on fuel availability, even prioritizing different energy sources for different organs, what might be the next frontier in understanding how we can truly optimize our individual metabolic health for a longer, healthier life? Something to consider. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We're always grateful to have you as part of our last-minute lecture family.